Well, I don't think parents and kids will be celebrating when they find out that they're being dragged into the criminal justice system and into long-term social services involvement just because, mum tapped a kid on the back of the legs. Because that's what we're talking about. I mean, the law, just to correct slightly what you said, the law cuts in, quite rightly, if a parent does anything which leaves more than transient reddening of the skin. So that's deemed unreasonable and it's unlawful. So let's be clear, what Scottish politicians are about to criminalise is only behaviour at the mildest end of the spectrum, behaviour which has always been regarded in law as totally reasonable. That's the kind of behaviour that's going to be criminalised. I know that Mary says we're not criminalising anybody, but if that's true, then why are parliamentarians today going to be debating the prosecution policy? It's clearly, if you amend the criminal law to outlaw smacking, then you are criminalising smacking. So that's just a fact.
I think it's really sad to hear people trying to scare and frighten parents and carers. We heard overwhelming evidence at the parliamentary committee that debated this issue, that both the police and social work, paediatricians, professionals from across all agencies saying this is not about criminalising parents. It happened in Ireland 2 years ago, and there's really strong evidence to say it's done nothing but good for children and families. There has been no increase in prosecution. This is scaremongering. It's the right thing to do. Most young parents don't hit children anyway, so it just brings the law into line with modern day practice.
There you go, Simon. It doesn't. It may not even need to be use this law. It just sends parents a signal: don't hit your child.
If you want to send a signal, use social media. Don't use the criminal law. I mean, you have to understand that if you criminalise something, then we expect the police and the prosecutors to actually enforce that law. Now, I have looked at what they're doing in other countries, and most of them have not used the criminal law.
Well,
they don't have common law systems.
Sweden's seen as very, very advanced, isn't it?
And even there, in fact, you find that they don't have the same criminal law system that we're talking about introducing in Scotland. If you look at New Zealand, which has a common law system, you do find accounts of hundreds of parents being brought into the criminal justice system, losing jobs, losing contact with their children. And in fact, there was a referendum held after the law was changed in New Zealand where 80% of the public voted to repeal the ban. Sadly, the politicians ignored them, and that's what's happening in Scotland. Parents don't want this.
There's an academic, sorry, Simon, to interrupt. There's an academic, Simon, is it Oklahoma State University, who you've quoted? What does he say?
Well, there's lots of academics. I mean, he says that there's no evidence that the kind of mild, infrequent smacking that we're talking about does any harm. The Welsh government, to their great credit, they want to bring in a ban, but they say plainly there isn't and never will be any evidence that this kind of mild, infrequent, reasonable chastisement is harmful. We have a raft of experts. Tommy Mackay, consultant child psychologist, former president of the British Psychological Society, former chair of the Children's Panel Advisory Committee, and many others who agree with us that in their words, this is going to cause traumatic intervention in good families.
Do you have any data on the other side, Mary?
There's huge data and international evidence that says there is the potential for hitting children to cause harm. Not in every case, of course not. But the issue at hand here is, what kind of society do we want to build? What kind of country does Scotland want to be? We have a huge problem with violence in our country. And it's amazing to me that we're even debating this in 2019. If we want to eradicate violence from our families, we need to think about how children can be safely nurtured, loved and cared for by their compassionate parents.
Simon, just a sec, sorry, the point about violence, this is not, you're sort of grouping parents in with knife crime and bank robbery and all of that, Mary. They might hit their child once.
What I'm saying is that most parenting practice, young parents, we've got a petition actually signed by grandparents and parents from the length and breadth of Scotland, and what they say is, when I was hit when I was a child, it did me no good, and I certainly wouldn't hit my grandchildren. That tells you that public opinion has completely transformed.
No, I mean,
this is
Mary
about principles, values and behaviour, and encouraging our most precious and vulnerable citizens.
Hang on, Mary. Hang on, Simon.
Thank you. We've seen poll after poll in Scotland showing that something like 70% of people do not want smacking criminalised. The Scottish Parliament itself consulted the public, and the figure was even higher. People who responded to the Scottish Parliament, I think it was closer to 80%, who don't want this ban. And the important thing is that we can both cite experts on both sides, but here's the reality. 85% of people were smacked themselves as children, and they know that their parents were not child abusers just because they tapped them on the back of the hand. And they also know that if the criminal law had been brought to bear, social workers have been brought into their families, that their family life would have been wrecked by that. And that's what we're in danger of unleashing on families. We have to admit, if we change the criminal law, we are criminalising smacking, and you have to expect the police, the prosecutors and the courts to enforce that law. And that's the reality which people that support this ban are just not willing to face up to.
Thank you very much, Simon Calvert.